Thank you. I'm going to show you some pictures of what I do for a living in Pittsburgh. No bar graphs, no pie charts. Too early in the morning for all that. The center is really what I built as the result of my own personal experience as a public school kid, unsuccessful public school kid. I was flunking out of public school, and an art teacher actually saved my life, a guy named Frank Ross. And I always start my talk with that story because people are born into the world as assets, not liabilities. It's all in the way you treat people that often determines outcomes. And my art teacher, Mr. Ross, had not ignored the fact I was a poor kid, African-American kid, tough neighborhood. I'm another one of the guys that's in the penitentiary or dead, like a lot of my buddies who didn't have the chance to meet Mr. Ross. So I always talk about that because I built my life and my career around that experience with Mr. Ross. And thanks to my mom, who raised us in a way that the fact that Mr. Ross was a white guy was not a disqualifier, in my opinion. It didn't matter, in my opinion. And I owe her and him a great deal. I'm going to show you some pictures of what I do for a living in Pittsburgh. And I want to thank Tony, Giles, and Mike particularly for getting me here. And it's really an honor to be a part of this conversation. I think part of the reason they wanted me to come was I kind of backed into all this stuff like innovation and creativity and social enterprise. I didn't realize I was one of them people till I showed up at the Harvard Business School 15 years ago. Some old patrician said, "You need to go to Harvard and tell them your story because you're really an innovative guy." So I went up to Harvard, and it worked out okay. And they said, "Man, you're a social innovator." I said, "Do you get a grant for being one of them things?" And as it turns out, that was the beginning chapter of the field of social enterprise. So we were actually one of the first organizations to ever get in that space. And as a result, we developed a terrific relationship with Harvard, and they've done 4 cases on our work. So we've gone from idea to scaling this thing. So I think you can leave out of here thinking, here's an idea about a guy that took something to scale. Here's how you replicate. Here's how you build a business. There are a lot of skill sets that are directly transferable from the not-for-profit to the for-profit, and I think vice versa. That just because we're in the, quote, nonprofit world does not give us an exemption for being run like a good business. In fact, I think it make it more responsible on our part to look like a good business because the people that you work with really need you, like big time, because we're working in those spaces where people are very deeply under-resourced. And to do that the right way, I think we've got to be extraordinary leaders and run extraordinary organizations. And I've learned a lot of this through trial and error in my own experience. But I only got 2 stories and 2 speeches. You're going to hear one. The other speech I don't give anymore because I used to fly for an airline called Braniff. Y'all remember Braniff? Well, I flew 727s for Braniff. Great idea, wrong airline. But it was cool. And I used to fly it out of Dallas-Fort Worth all the time. Had I never gotten laid off from Braniff, I probably never would have built the center. So it's one of those life experiences that you aren't seeing at first. And I was real despondent about losing my job. But as it turns out, because I got laid off and the company subsequently went out of business, I was able to open up a new portal of opportunity. I'm going to talk to you about the second part of the speech, which is the center that I built in Pittsburgh in the center started in the 60s, and we built a facility I'm going to show you some pictures of in the 80s. But it started because of a public school teacher and getting me excited about the arts, and it was during the riots, and I wanted to help out. So I founded something called Manchester Craftsmen's Guild, which is an arts program in 1968 during the riots, and I wanted to save all the black folks' souls by teaching them to be ceramic artists. And back then I thought that was the answer to the problems of the Western world. So I built this thing. I lived upstairs in the sleeping bag, had pottery wheels in the basement, and started dragging kids in off the street to to save their souls with clay. And I started hearing back from the school system the kids were starting to show up more regularly. And I figured it out. There wasn't anything wrong with the kids. The school system was the problem. The kids were fine. They needed clay, enthusiasm, somebody to believe in them. So I founded Manchester Craftsmen's Guild to do that. And I think it's very important that you understand I am a very big advocate for public education, but not like it's currently configured. Unfortunately, I work with people with high school diplomas that they've been granted who can't read the diplomas. Now, I don't know about Dallas, but I can tell you about Pittsburgh. That's not working for me. We cannot have kids walking the street with diplomas that they can't read. So part of our strategy is we're going to change that conversation, one kid at a time. The other thing I do is this Bidwell Training Center, which nowadays is a vocational program. Now, I don't know anything about vocational education, but back in the 60s, I was running a little arts program, and these people that ran Bidwell asked me if I'd take it over, not in the facility I'm going to show you, but in this old funky building. And back in the 60s, I thought I was Moses, could save everybody. And I said, yeah, I can lead all the poor to the promised land, all that. So I interviewed for Bidwell on the street corner. And the only two questions they asked me was, did I graduate from college and have to pay my income tax? I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have. Why? I said, well, if you take the job, you'll find out. So next Tuesday, I take the job, show up at Bidwell, no windows, holes in the floor, holes in the roof, and the guys are on their knees gambling at the front door, and I showed up with my Brooks Brothers suit on. They looked up at me and went right back to gambling. I said at the end of the first day, Miss Jones, I showed up here today. The guys were on their knees gambling. I didn't recognize the game they were playing. She said, oh, they were taking bets on how long you last in the job. That was the student body. And I said, yeah, all right. So I bought the beer and I bought the paint. I said, anybody done show up to paint this building is fired. One guy didn't show up and I fired him. I said, we living like this, man. If I'm going to devote my life to this thing, we're going to start looking like the solution and not the problem. So we painted the building, I bought the beer, and it's been quite an adventure. The other image I'll put into your mind, for those of you get despondent about not making payroll, which I suspect some of you may have had that challenge. Well, I did, and this white man showed up in my office in the 60s with a big old gold badge. He says, I'm looking for the new director of Bidwell. I said, well, that's me, sir. He said, well, son, how long you had the job? I said, well, actually, it's my first day. He said, well, I hate to ruin your first day, but I'm from the Internal Revenue Service. Your center owes us $300,000 in withholding taxes. Now, that's 1980 money. So net present value, that's a lot of money. And my predecessors had neglected to mention that doing my job interview. So I had to raise $300,000, which I did, and I paid off the debt and I saved the school. That's important for you to know to see what I did with it. It's easy to tell this story now. You know, it's a beautiful building. I'm walking around all these honorary degrees and all that stuff. But that would not give you the right impression. The reality is it started in the streets during the riots. And we were down to our last prayer, man. But we've been able to turn it into something pretty spectacular. And as I think you'll see, we have great opportunities in front of us to do the right thing. One of the things that Mr. Ross, my art teacher, did for us, he took a bunch of us inner city kids to see a very famous house called Falling Water. Y'all heard of that? Frank Lloyd Wright? Yeah, that's your literacy question for the morning. All right, well, Mr. Ross took a bunch of us kids. So here's this Italian guy with these black kids in his van, and you get down through the woods, and you come out into this clearing. There's this beautiful house set up on a rock, and it had a creek running right through the middle of the house. And I looked at that and I said, in my neighborhood, we spend time trying to keep the water out of the house. This guy's got a creek running right down to the middle of the house. That's an interesting way of looking at water. The other thing that fascinated me was the quality of the light that enveloped that house. I said, if I can get that light into my neighborhood, I'm halfway home. So I committed myself to building a Frank Lloyd Wright building before I left the planet, and I did. I'm going to show it to you. That's what we built. This is our concept of what a center for poor people is supposed to look like. This happens to be in the highest crime rate neighborhood in Pittsburgh, which is my neighborhood. We have a murder a month, but not in my center. When you guys come to visit, Tony and Giles and some of the other guys, Mike, of course, is invited, what you will not see is a metal detector or security cameras, because there aren't any. In the toughest neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Remind me to take you to my old high school. It's still up the street, 4 blocks away. Steel doors and metal detectors and bars on the windows. And the police have canine units oftentimes out in front of the building to introduce the kids to the school every day. 4 blocks away is a multi-million-dollar Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired training center that has no metal detectors and no security cameras. We haven't lost a screwdriver in 28 years. Zero. Nothing. The concept I want to leave you with today is environment drives behavior. Beautiful environments create beautiful kids. Prisons create prisoners. If you don't remember anything else I say, but I've lived that principle, and that's for real. You have to look like the solution and not the problem. Particularly if you're going to work with challenged communities, you have to be an example of what you want people to be like. And not just in a brochure, you got to do it in real time. That's the entrance to the building. We have fabulous artwork throughout the building. It's all my taste. Well, because I raised all the money. I said to my board, when y'all raise the money, we'll put your taste on the wall. But we have quilts and clay and calligraphy, and everywhere your eye turns, there's something beautiful looking back at you. That's quite deliberate. The other thing is Pittsburgh is gray from November to May. But even on a gray day, the building is flooded with sunlight. And part of the reason for that is poor people are in the dark in their heads all the time. They've forgotten to look at the sun because they don't have any hope. So the idea was to get people out of the dark, put them in the sunlight, and let them know that the sun's for everybody on the planet, not just rich kids. So even in November, this building is very full of light, which means by definition it's very optimistic and very hopeful. That's at Christmas time. This is what we think a school's supposed to look like during the holiday season. You cannot promote hope if you aren't living it. So the welfare people and the homeless guys and the unemployed adults and the at-risk kids can see that during Christmas. Why? Because we believe in life. That's why. And it looks exactly like that photograph. And it's turned out to be a pretty big deal. That's our boardroom. As you can see, I'm obviously sympathetic to the arts. That's our boardroom table. And it's a very beautiful table. And the reason we have it, a friend of mine went to Kyoto, Japan, and she married some guy and brought him back to Pittsburgh. And back in the old days, we were a building trades program. She said, yeah, I understand you teach carpentry. I said, yeah, why? She said, well, I married this guy from Japan, and he's a woodworker, and I was wondering if you give him a job. I said, well, bring the guy over. I'll talk to him. Well, he didn't speak any English. And you can imagine how much Japanese I speak. But I found out he had studied with a very famous Japanese-American named George Nakashima. And I happened to be hip to Nakashima. I said, tell your husband I'm going to give him a job teaching carpentry. And she did. He stood up and he bowed. She said, please tell Mr. Strickland I'm so grateful for the job, but I apologize that my English is so poor. I said, well, you tell your husband the students he's going to work with don't speak English either, so they ought to get along fine. And I hired the guy, and we got 60 pieces of furniture out for the building. That's Black Walnut. We've since spun him off and do his own business. The guy's got a year waiting list doing furniture for rich people. So it was actually one of the first innovations that we spun off and actually made it into an enterprise. It's doing very well. And I promote Heinz ketchup wherever I go in the world, which I hope you eat down here in Dallas. And if you do, eat more of it. I don't know where your politics are about ketchup, but I stand with ketchup. In the old days, before I got real sophisticated with my cardboard box, I had this box in a bag, and I was trying to raise money to build this center. And I got called into the office of United States Senator John Heinz, who happened to be the heir to the Heinz ketchup fortune, which was like going to see the Wizard of Oz, because he had about $600 million at the time, and I had about 60 cents. He said, man, you've done a great job with the black people and the inner city folks, and we understand you want to build a new school. I said, yeah, I do. He said, well, you could help the Heinz company's affirmative action goals out. If you'd add a culinary program, new school when you get it built, that way we could train some black folks and hire them, solve the problem. Well, we were a building trades program, remember? Bricklaying, carpentry and stuff. I said, Senator, I'm really reluctant to go into a field I don't know anything about, man. But I promise you, give me the money, We'll build the school. I'll come back in a couple years. We'll get that culinary program going just like you asked. He said, well, what would your answer be if I said I'd give you $1 million? I said, Senator, it appears that we're going into the food training business. And John did give us $1 million, but as importantly, he loaned us the head of research for the Heinz Ketchup Company. And we borrowed the curriculum from the Culinary Institute of America. And we wrote a curriculum for poor people in this $1 million kitchen. We've never looked back. We lost John to a plane accident. I believe he would have been handing the keys to President-elect Obama in the White House, but he didn't make it. But as God is my witness, sure as I'm standing at this podium, you'll feel his spirit at the front door of that building. So as it turns out, Heinz is another one of our collaborations. And as you'll see for the next few minutes, we have collaboration after collaboration after collaboration. We've been able to figure out a strategy to get these companies directly involved with our work. And it's pretty exciting because it spins off many opportunities unanticipated at first. Some of our folks built an amphitheater for the students. That's lunch at the school. This is what we feed the students every day. We've discovered that it's very difficult to teach people when they're hungry. So the answer is give them something to eat. But since we don't do fast food, we do gourmet food. Basically, everybody at this school gets a gourmet lunch every day. Good for the heads, better for the stomachs. I wanted to take the stigma out of food. Good food's for every kid on the planet, not just rich kids. And if people tell you can't serve gourmet lunches in the inner city to poor kids, send them to Pittsburgh. We've been doing it for 28 years. You just have to want to do it bad enough. Environment drives behavior. Good food, healthy. Sunlight, healthy. Values, healthy. That's what we figured out. This is all work being done by people who supposedly know nothing about food presentation in 6 months. So what I'm suggesting to you is the only thing wrong with poor people from what we can determine is they don't have any money, which happens to be a curable condition. It's all in the way you think about people that drives behavior. That's what poor folks are doing in 6 months, which ought to suggest to you that they actually are assets in disguise. And that's part of the drumbeat, to get the people on the liability side onto the asset side. One of our guys, that's Chef Keith. That's our dining room. We do a lot of black tie functions at the school, Medical Association, Engineer Society. The idea is to change the picture that comes into your head to that picture. We want to change the conversation about the inner city and elevate this conversation to a level where it needs to be. And exactly the kind of thought process that Tony and Giles and these guys at SVP have put together is a splendid example of how you can institutionalize that process, in my opinion. We train pharmaceutical techs for the pharmacy industry. You come to Pittsburgh, I'll show you poor folks doing pharmaceutical applications in 6 months with no background in science, for real. We got them working for the healthcare industry, all the hospitals, and most of the retail pharmacists. These folks and these folks. This guy's working for the Water Treatment Authority. He was down to his last unemployment check when he showed up at the door. We turned him into a chem tech. He's working for the Water Treatment Authority, $50,000 a year, case closed. So we now know that we can teach that technology. Look at the equations on the board. We're not making this stuff up. These are guys actually doing this stuff. So what we've learned is that if you change the environment and you build values into your curriculum and you set expectations, people perform. Those are a medical coding group, these folks. And that's our library, more of our handcrafted furniture. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, I got people in that library with diplomas that they can't read. Well, if they can't read the diploma we give them, I won't sign it. So we make sure they can read the thing before I put my name on it. So we can solve that problem too. This is the arts program. Remember I'm the black guy from the 60s making pottery? How many of you were even around in the 60s? Raise your hand. That's cool. One time nobody raised a hand. I check out who I'm talking to, where the jokes don't work. Well, I was around during the disturbances. Back then we called them what they were. They were riots, and guys were getting shot, and I wanted to help out, man. So the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese, Robert Appleyard, really liked me. And I was out there in the row house making pottery, and he called me into his office and said, I think you're doing the Lord's work, son, and I'm going to give you some money out of my discretionary fund to get you going. So Bishop Appleyard actually was responsible for the creation of Manchester Craftsman's Guild. True story. And we became very good friends, and I was asked to speak at his memorial service. I got up, and the bishop's wife said, Bishop Appleyard cried like a baby when he saw your name in the New York Times with your first presidential appointment. I've had 3. President Bush 41, President Bush 43, and our current President Barack Obama, the kid from the inner city who supposedly can't learn anything. Don't judge the book by the cover. The other thing that the bishop taught me before he died, wherever there are Episcopalians, there's money in very close proximity. And I got the Mellon Church, like National Gallery Mellon. They were the church that put up the initial money, with Livingston L. Biddle III, who was the chair of the board of the vestry. I buried Toby Biddle back in that courtyard about 6 years ago. And the point of the story is opportunities for collaboration come across all sectors. It's not the exclusive providence of anybody. And if you're in the business that we're in, you got to be open to listening to any ideas from any direction that they come. So what we do these days, we work with kids just like me, inner city kids, and we use the arts as the strategy to turn these kids' lives around. We got them pretty good at it. So we do clay. These are all kids, for the most part, who are struggling within the public school system. And we were able to double the graduation rate for these children, particularly in the last couple years. The demographic is 40-50% dropout rate for minority kids. We graduated 99% of the kids last year. Why? Because there's nothing wrong with the kids. You have to build a world-class center with world-class faculty, and you can solve this problem in partnership with the school district. This guy's going to Penn State. His brother's already there. This is all kids' work. These are all the people who supposedly have no values, no sophistication, can't learn anything. Well, that's true. Where'd that come from? It's a mosaic piece the kids did for the school. The idea is that if you want the children to be a part of the world, you have to bring the world there so they know what it looks like. And after a while, people become a function of the things that they can imagine and experience. Look at that young man's eyes. That's a kid that's engaged in learning something. When I go to schools these days, the first thing I do is I look at the children's eyes. Usually, they're looking out the window or at each other, but they ain't looking at a book. In our center, they're looking at books. And this is all voluntary. We do photography. Even though the world's digital, we still do film. The kid who took that picture is working for Walt Disney Studios. That's the gallery for the kids and the professionals. So we do professional shows. Our culinary people do smoked salmon for the art opening. We have a museum quality invitation, and people show up. We started doing them with the kids 15, 16 years ago, and none of the parents would come. The kids would break their backs, do a great show, smoked salmon, fabulous invitation, and none of the parents would show up. And one of the kids actually asked me that night if I would be willing to be his father for the evening. That kind of stuff. And I saw these kids start to tear up because the parents wouldn't show. So I got tired of looking at kids tearing up because the parents wouldn't show, and I hired a guy that got off into Jesus, saving souls for the Lord with a Bible and all that kind of stuff. I said, I want you to come work for me. Tone down the Jesus stuff, but keep the enthusiasm, man. I can't get the parents to come. He said, I'll get them to come. So I took the keys to the van, went to Miss Jones' house. I said, Miss Jones, I knew you wanted to come to your kid's art opening, but you probably didn't have a ride. So I came to give you a ride. Well, we got 15 parents, 20 parents. The last show, 300 parents. And we didn't pick up one parent. Why? Now it's not cool not to show up and support your kids at the Manchester Craftsman's Guild, or people think you're a lousy parent. There's no statistical difference between white mothers and black mothers and Asian mothers and Hispanic mothers. Mothers will go where their kids are being nurtured every day of the week. So we got that problem figured out. On the left is the instructor, on the right is the student. We're advancing a new concept in education. It's called We Love Our Students. Very revolutionary. The guy on the left is the director of the program. That's Jermaine Watkins. I started with him in 7th grade. He went to college and is back running the program that saved his life. All you technology guys, don't groan when you see that slide. In the old days, I think Tony can vouch for this. In the old days, I actually had a slide projector. You remember those? They had box with duct tape on the corner. And I got called out to a place called the Silicon Valley. So I showed up with my slide projector. And these people looked at me like I was from Pluto, man. But that's cool. I blew off the dust, plugged in a little slide projector, told my story. The lady came out there and she said, wow, that's a heck of a story. My only criticism is your computers are getting a little dated. Well, they don't look about the same to me. So what do you do for a living? She says, I help run a company called Hewlett-Packard. It's some idea there's an instantaneous solution to this problem. And the long and short of it, they got $750,000 from HP and the systems engineer to go with it. And we now have one of the hippest digital imaging centers east of the Mississippi River. And we have put kids into Pratt and Rhode Island School of Design right out of the imaging center. But I keep this slide in here for nostalgia reasons, and you never know when an Apple representative might be in the audience. This is called a classroom. This is how you're supposed to treat your children. You build that, you solve your problem. Oh, I also built a music hall while I was at it. I'm very glad I did. This is another example of an innovation. Mr. Ross used to bring in jazz albums, and I used to listen to this music in high school. I said, man, if I ever get a chance to build a building, I'm going to have a music hall, which I did. And Dizzy Gillespie showed up. And I said, why'd you come to a black school in the middle of the inner city, don't even have a reputation in music? He said, Billy Taylor told me a black guy built this thing. I didn't believe, wanted to see for myself. And you ought to build one of these centers in every city in this country, and I'm going to help you do it. I said, well, you came here, that's cool. He said, no, I'm going to allow you to record the concert. I'm going to give you the rights to the music, which he did. Then a fellow named Herbie Hancock dropped by, pretty good piano player. He said, Dizzy talking about you, and I know why. And then Wynton Marsalis showed up. Branford Marsalis, his brother, and then the dad, Ellis Marsalis, who's a heck of a piano player, by the way. The Basie Band, Shirley Horn, Betty Carter, Nancy Wilson, all of them. So we now have 600 recordings. Have y'all ever heard of the Grammy Awards? Well, we've won 6 Grammys in the middle of an inner city neighborhood. Supposedly they can't do anything right. So we're the hot young jazz label in the United States of America in the middle of the inner city of Pittsburgh. Look at the children's faces. That's what children are supposed to look like when they go to school. These kids. There's Dizzy, just in case you thought I was lying. He was there. That's a guy named Pat Metheny, pretty good guitar player. Those are 5 of the Grammys. We won back-to-back Grammys with Nancy Wilson. 5-point surround sound. That's the place on opening night. If you'd have dropped a bomb in that room, you'd have killed all the rich people in Pennsylvania. Because they were all sitting there, including my mother and father, who were in the 3rd row on the left-hand side. They're both now gone, but they lived long enough to see their kid build a center in the neighborhood, open it up black tie. The next night, I had the neighborhood come in. Had the same food, same music. Because I wanted to establish the principle, you don't have to have a tuxedo on to be treated with dignity at our school. And I knew that would work out pretty good. So we now sell out all of our concerts basically in subscription for the last 20 years in a row. This was burned out during the riots, and I had a model built, and I built that. That's a real estate project we did. So our little organization built a 60,000 square foot medical tech building. Technically, the thing makes money. Actually, we just sold it, but it's worked out pretty good. And this is our concept of how to revitalize the inner city. And my real estate buddy said I did pretty good for my first real estate project. I pre-leased the building before I built it, which is apparently the way you're supposed to do real estate. And it's worked out okay. Here's the fountain. Got a bank in there. And I also built that. About 10 or 12 years ago, a guy came over to my house. He brought this flower as a gift. I said, what is that thing? He said, oh, it's an orchid. I said, oh, that's cool. So I'm kind of staring at this plant, and I'm curious about stuff, so I bought a book, Orchids for Beginners, and started visiting greenhouses. After the third greenhouse, I said, it ain't that big a deal. I can do that. So I raised $6 million, and I built a greenhouse to grow those. We have our students from the inner city growing orchids, which we sell in the grocery stores, generate money for the school. And it's become a great signature piece for all the things that we believe in. So we have now one of the best horticultural training programs, probably east of the Mississippi River. But this has worked out pretty good. And now we're doing those, and we're doing hydrangeas, and now we're doing poinsettias. So we've got a nice little cottage industry thing going, built around our educational program. And it's very exciting to see what's going on in the inner city by way of sustaining and enhancing life itself. And this is at the Home and Garden Show. Our guys took first prize 2 years ago. We beat out Miracle Grow and all the big guys. Inner city people who supposedly can't do anything. Now I'm down to the end of the talk. This is where the story takes on a couple more interesting dimensions. Remember I was out there at the Silicon Valley with my little slideshow? Well, another guy came out of the audience. He said, that is a speech, man. I said, cool, man. He had a T-shirt on, blue jeans, tennis shoes. I said, what do you do for a living? He said, oh, I built a company called eBay. I said, oh, cool, man. You got a card? I didn't know eBay from that bottle of water. So I put the guy's card in my pocket, and I went back to Pittsburgh. I asked one of the little techie kids, I said, have you ever heard of something called eBay? He said, yeah, Mr. Strickland, that's the Electronic Commerce Network. I said, holy smokes, I met the guy that built the company. So I called him up. I said, Mr. Skull, I've come to have a much deeper appreciation of who you are, man. He said, I thought you'd figure it out sooner or later. Here's $500,000. I said, what's that for? He says, your first replication. Dizzy was right. I think you can scale this thing. So we're scaling this thing. Now, it's not a franchise. We don't own the centers. I don't want to own the centers. What I want to do is to get them built, to work with the constituency I've just addressed here today. So very quickly, Boston, Buffalo, Cleveland, New Haven, Brockway, Cincy, Grand Rapids, and San Fran. This is the space in San Fran before it was fixed up. There's Mr. eBay, Jeff Skoll, Billy Wong, and the kids doing digital imaging. That's the space. Every space is beautiful, or we will not build it. Y'all heard of Steelcase, the furniture folks? Well, Steelcase is one of our corporate partners. They discount the furniture by 60% and oftentimes donate the design. So every space is pristine. There's a certain standard that represents our value proposition. Those children are not losers. Look at their faces. They're winners. Cincinnati cut the dropout rate to 6% in Cincinnati in 24 months. There's the space. There's the gallery. They turned this into a mural project. This is one we built in Grand Rapids because a guy named Jim Welsh was in the audience many, many years ago, heard me speak, came to Pittsburgh. He says, I'm one of the original owners of Steelcase, and I believe in what you're doing. And I think this is God's work. So Jim and Jim Hackett, the chairman of Steelcase at the time, the DeVos family, Amway, they all put up the money to build this thing. And it's turned out to be pretty spectacular. Those are photographs of Dr. King taken during the last 2 years of his life by a Life magazine photographer. So every time we open up a center, we bring that show so that the children know who Dr. King was. That's the dining facility for the kids. Western Michigan Center. There's the gallery, photography program, and some of the kids. One of the ways that we now know that the program is taking effect on the kids, they start pulling their pants up. These used to be called welfare mothers. They're not welfare mothers. They were. Welfare is a state of mind. These guys are pharmaceutical technicians working for the DeVos Medical System in downtown Grand Rapids. Case closed. Cleveland, these are the kids. We saw kids get off the bus for the first time. They walked away from the place because they thought it couldn't be for them. It was too beautiful. That's how upside down this conversation's gotten in our country, man. This guy records Alicia Keys. This is our phlebotomy program. So our guys all went to work for Cleveland Clinic and University Hospital. Got that problem figured out. This is the facility. This is the one we built in New Haven. During the course of the time of trying to build one in New Haven, this African-American man sold his company to Procter & Gamble. So he went from entrepreneur to millionaire. And his first act of philanthropy is he wrote a check for $1.5 million to build the center. So we made him chairman of the board. $1.5 million equals chairman of the board. This is the one we opened up in Boston. Deval Patrick, the governor, put up $1.5 million for this thing. And we graduated our first class. That's what we built. Johnson in Wales is becoming one of our corporate partners. One of our students, that's the first class. Most of them went to work, and most of them had criminal records. So we now know that we can recycle people who've had a challenged background and turn them into productive citizens. They're not working at fast food places, legal seafoods and up. Sodexo, as it turns out, is becoming one of our big corporate partners. They like the quality of what we do. They're a global company, so that's another partnership we're evolving. This is one in Brockway, Pennsylvania. This is for poor white folks, 2 hours from Pittsburgh. You've ever heard of Punxsutawney Phil? That's where he lives. And that we built a center up there because a Republican leader in the state house had heard about our work and invited us to go up and meet him in Brockway. And it turned out to be quite a day. We opened this thing up. Everybody got a job out of the first 2 classes. 100% went to work. So here's an African-American guy from the inner city, was my then COO, Jesse Fife. We built a program in a poor white rural community that transforms the lives of these young people and adults so they could feed their kids. You know what the takeaway is? Poverty's poverty. Doesn't matter what color it is. It all feels about the same. And Akko Israel, as Mike was mentioning. Since I did this presentation, we've been over to Israel 4 or 5 times. And it's a quick story. I do my little slideshow. 5 years ago, Inc. magazine said, we want you to come up here and talk to these 500 corporations and bring your slideshow with you. Well, that's cool. So I go up and do my little slide presentation. Apparently there was a man in the audience who was very taken with what I was into. And he claims, he came up to me and said, that's a heck of a story. If I ever get any money, I'm going to give you some of it. I said, cool, man. I'm sure it'll all work out. Well, that guy called me a year ago. He said, you working with the poor folks in Pittsburgh like you were doing before? I said, yes, sir, I am. He said, well, I told you if I ever got any money, I was going to give you some of it. And you must hear that a lot. I says, actually, I do. But that's cool. He said, well, we're going to do something called an IPO next week. And if it's successful, I might call you back. I said, well, God bless you, man. Click. I hope it works out. Well, a week later, he calls back, says the IPO was successful. How much does it cost to build one of them things? I said, I don't know. You can get it built and open and run it for a couple of years, probably for $5 million. He said, cool, I'll take one. I said, where you want to build this thing? He said, Chicago. He wrote the check for Chicago. No proposal. He didn't even want a handshake. He started wiring the money in Pittsburgh. My controller came in and said, "Where's this money coming from?" I said, "It ain't dope money. Just put it in the bank. It's cool." So we got Chicago underway. It's being renovated as we speak. But Mr. Sarowitz said, "All right, weren't you trying to do something in Israel?" I said, "Yeah, man, I've been over with Jews and Arabs 4 times. I can't get anybody to do anything." He said, "Well, I'll go with you next time." So he and his wife, Jessica, and I went to Israel. And we had the Jews and the Palestinians sitting in the basement of this youth hostel, and I'm telling my story. I said, "Look, fellas, I went to the Jewish kibbutzes and the Arab villages. Your kids look exactly the same. They're just children, man. They need a center." And Steve said, to move this along, Jessica and I are prepared to write a check for $1.5 million to get it going, which he put on the table. The center is now open. It's in Akko, Israel, 30 miles from the Syrian border. I also got me an audience with Shimon Peres, who heard that I was in Israel, and he invited me to meet him. And he basically said, "Keep going. If we can pull this thing off in Akko, Israel, there's the blueprint for the Middle East. That's where I'm headed with this thing." And that's the first class going through. Those are Jews and Palestinians in class together. Look at their faces. Those are not hostile people. They see their commonality. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about. So I'm telling you, just because I'm from the inner city of Pittsburgh does not mean that what we have learned is not applicable to the rest of the world. And if we can pull this thing off and we're on our way, this is going to be a very big story before it's over. And Chicago, Sharon, Vancouver, Virgin Islands, New Haven, Boston, Brockway, Buffalo, L.A., Denver, Tacoma, Laurel Valley, and Chester. This is the next group of cities that are moving forward. That's since I saw you guys. So we've added 3 more cities. Right here, raise your hand, is Paulo and Maria. They're part of my team. They run the replication division of this whole thing. I brought them down here today because they're going to do a breakout session at, 1:30 or something? You ought to go. They're really smart people, and they can explain to you how these things work in detail. I think they're going to be doing a workshop. And these are cities we're talking to about building centers. And I'm not looking for work. I ain't out beating on doors looking for work. I got a job. But we're starting to get cities talking to us about building these things. So here's the end game. And these are the countries we're also talking to. And I have a book out. Buy the book. It's big type and it's real short. But every time I sell a book, I make another friend. And here's where I'm coming from, folks. I'm done with this now. A couple things. One, I didn't make it up. I don't have to make it up. This is directly as a result of all the things that the SVP people believe in. Innovation, investing in the community, doing the right thing, getting an entrepreneurial spirit involved with changing social problems. That's a big idea. It has application to Dallas, and as far as I'm concerned, it has application everywhere. I think that you all in this room may be the best chance, maybe the only chance our country has left. Look at the presidential debates. I'm not going to get there from here, man. It's going to be you guys. It's got to come from the bottom up, not the top down. That's what I realized. It's you guys. Decent people who know right from wrong, want to do the right thing about their community. That's what's up. In fact, I believe it so much I'm prepared to literally bet my life on this. And I don't mean that as symbolism. I mean it because of this box I'm dragging around. This is my first public appearance where I've had to use this thing. I don't intend to be using it for very long. In a process now of getting a lung transplant. But to underscore the importance and the respect I have for Mike and Giles and Tony and the guys, I took myself off the transplant list to come here today to make a point. I'm in with both feet. Now, if you want to do this work, get in the boat with us, man. I am convinced that we can save our country in our lifetime. And I'm not just doing it for me or my kids. I'm doing for all the people that I see standing on street corners at 10 o'clock at night in Dallas and in Pittsburgh and Chicago with their hands in their pockets with nowhere to go. I believe we can change this conversation. I think that we can build a country that everybody's a part of. And I think you guys are going to be the salvation of something called hope. Because at the end of the day, what I just showed you is hope. And thank you for being so polite and listening to me this morning.